I want to tell you a true story. I've been to the country of Haiti a lot of times, and it's the poorest country in the entire world, actually. The average person makes about $400 a year. That's about a dollar a day. And so just a very poor, poverty-stricken place. Also in Haiti, the religion, like the main religion is voodoo. And so it is a dark, spiritually dark place. And I got to meet a man by the name of Larry who started a mission in Haiti that has now been there for about 40 years. But when he first got there in the 70s, he knew what he wanted to do. He had this vision from God that he knew he wanted to do to help not only bring the gospel to Haiti, but also to begin to serve the physical needs of the people. And so there was this one area of land that he believed that God was leading him to. But there was this humongous tree right in the middle of it that he would have to, if he bought the land, he would have to cut it down. But the locals said, you can't cut that down. That's like the voodoo tree, man. Like the voodoo priests are going to come and they're going to curse you. And he's like, okay, yep, this is it. I'm going to buy this. He gets the money, he buys the land. And he says, I'm going to cut the tree down. The voodoo priests, of course, make their threats. They say, if you do this, we're going to put our, voodoo magic on you, and you're going to be cursed, and it's not going to be good. And Larry said, you just come on. Here's the night that I'm going to do it on. And he invites them all. Now, that may sound pretty brave, but let me give you some background about Larry. Larry grew up in the very poor hills of Virginia, was a country boy, was abused as a child, had a very rough upbringing. At 18, he went to Vietnam and served a couple tours there in the war. He saw some unthinkable violence, did some unthinkable violence, came back an alcoholic, and eventually met Jesus and became a Christian, and then becomes a missionary. And so that same fearless heart that he had as a man who did not follow Jesus, he still had that fearless heart as a Christian, but only now it had purpose. So when he's being threatened by these voodoo priests, he's like, oh, come on, I've gone against worse. And so the night comes when he's supposed to cut down the voodoo tree, and all the voodoo priests, the whole village, everybody comes. All the voodoo priests are there, and they're just waiting. They're doing their little dance, their little magic stuff. And it begins to rain, and not only rain, but it's a storm, and so there's lightning. Well, that made the voodoo priests even more excited because the reason they had chosen that tree as their place of worship where they do sacrifices is because years before that tree had been hit by lightning, it had been split in half, but neither side fell down. And they believed that when those kind of things happened, the spirits, the gods would indwell that area. And so that's where they did their worship. Larry preached in the middle of the rain, and when he was done preaching, had his chainsaw, and before he cut it down, it actually stopped raining. And then he cut the tree down, and then preached the gospel again. And that mission, I've got a picture, oh, there's Larry, there's a picture of Larry in the middle. And then if you put that picture up of the mission, you see the big tree in the middle. This is they've added so much to this over the years. This was my first time in 1999. There's a big tree now in the middle. It's a new tree. Because really, truthfully, the tree wasn't his problem. It's the fact that the people believed that it had spiritual power because of the voodoo stuff. So he just cut it down. Grew a new tree in its place. That mission's been there for some 40 years. They feed over 100 people a day. They take care of orphans and widows. They feed the elderly in a place where there is no retirement plans. I mean, the average, the life expectancy of a man, of a guy, of a boy in Haiti is 47. For a woman, it's 51. There's no retirement plans. This mission takes care of the elderly as well. I could go on and on, but this showdown between Larry and the voodoo priest reminds me of this very brave story, or story of bravery in the Bible in 1 Kings chapter 18. The prophet Elijah, when he has this showdown with 450 priests or prophets of a god named Baal. Now, in this time of Israel, a man named Ahab was king. And it says this in 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 30. It says, Ahab did what was evil in God's sight, more evil than any of the kings before him. And there had been some pretty evil kings. And Ahab was married to a woman who was not a Jewish person, who was not an Israelite. Her name was Jezebel. She was the princess of a pagan king of Sidon. And in that land, in Sidon, they worshiped a god named Baal. Baal was the fertility or the weather god. And she brought those ideas to Israel, and she taught it to her husband, her new husband, Ahab. And Ahab kind of liked it because there was a lot of like sexual perversion and different things and rituals that they did within their way of worshiping to get the God's attention. Ahab kind of liked this. And then they began to teach it to all of the people, and all of the Israelites kind of liked it. And they began to worship this god known as the weather god, Baal. But God would send his prophets, and he sent his prophets to warn Jezebel and Ahab. And Jezebel didn't like this. And so she tried to assassinate all of God's prophets. And 100 of them were able to escape. And then Jezebel puts into official, like government office, 850 priests and prophets of different gods, but 450 of them were prophets of the god Baal, the weather god. Are you with me? Okay, that's when God sends this prophet known as Elijah, who walked in extreme power of the Lord. He did miracles at every turn. God was with this man. And Elijah comes to Ahab, the king, with this message. King, it's not going to rain for 3 years. Now, that's a big deal. Because if you don't have rain, you don't have crops. If you don't have crops, you don't have food. If you don't have food to grow in a agricultural nation, then you don't have an economy. And I don't know if you know anything about politics, but politics want the economy to be good, right? And so Elijah says, you want to worship the weather god instead of the one and only God, creator of the universe? Okay. Then God says it's not going to rain for 3 years, and that's exactly what happens. And after 3 years, God sends Elijah back to Ahab, and Elijah comes to the king, to Ahab, and says, Ahab, I'm here with a message from the Lord, but I want you to round up those 450 priests and prophets of Baal. Have them meet me at Mount Carmel, and tell all of the tribal leaders of Israel, the family leaders, to come and meet me on the mountain as well. All the people come. The 450 prophets of Baal, the weather god, all show up. And in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 21, here's what Elijah says to the family leaders of Israel. He says, how long will you waver between two opinions, between two ideas, between two thoughts? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. And here's what the Bible says next. The Bible says, and the people were silent. You ever been there? You ever had a moment when you knew that you should stand up and say something, but you remained silent because you were afraid, possibly because you were a coward? That kid being picked on in school at lunch, and everybody's doing that in the cool crowd or whatever, and you just decide to either join in or just remain silent because you're a coward. You ever been there? All of the family leaders were silent. James chapter 4, verse 17 in the New Testament, this is Jesus' little brother, a guy that grew up, that had an older brother that was nothing but courageous. James said this, it is a sin when you know the good that you need to do, but you don't do it. You see, in the religious world, we like to talk about sin a lot as the bad things that we should not do. And there's some truth there, right? I think God is more interested in the good things that you know you should do. But when you don't do it, that's a sin. The sin of being a coward. Elijah says to the people, how long will you waver between two opinions, between two thoughts? This word waver, he borrowed that from the actual pagan prophet priests of Baal. Because when they would worship, they would get drunk, right? Because back then, they thought like when you would get drunk, a spirit would enter your body and you would have the power of that God, of that spirit. And so they would get drunk and they would do their like dances and sacrifices, but this word waver was something that these priests and prophets would do. When all the people would gather around and they'd do their worship acts and different bad things would happen, and they would kind of like do this dance skip. This little, I got not a lot of moves of any kind, but they do this little dance skip. It was called a waver. And so Elijah is saying to the people of Israel that, stay with me, this is a people that exist because God chose them. God gave them laws. God said, I know how all the nations of the world live. Here's what I want you to do. You're going to be a nation that's actually going to bless all the other tribes in all of the world. When there are poor people, I want you, when you harvest your crops, leave a portion of your food, leave it alone, so the poor can come and get it. When a foreigner, when an immigrant comes from another land and they want to come to your land, to Israel, let them come, because you used to not be a people too. You used to be in slavery, but I set you free. Elijah is talking to those people that come from that tribe. And he says, how long are you going to dance and waver between God's way, your tradition, your tribe, and waver over here to the new trend, the new thing, the new God, the new way? You need to choose, but they were silent. And for many of you, you've known God's way for a while. You know what the right, wise way is to live, and yet you want to be accepted in your crowd, in the new trend, in the new things, in the new ways. Maybe the cool kids, you're thinking, maybe they know something I don't know. Can I give you some old man advice? They don't know things you don't know. So if you feel like you're not in the cool crowd, you're not in the crowd that kind of seems like they're super confident and super awesome and super pretty and super smart and whatever else, and they're 13, 16, whatever, and they're walking around like that, and they talk as if they have like this wisdom of life because they've been alive for 16 years. And you're like, man, maybe I'm missing out. Because old man people say one thing, right, about God's way, but young, cool-looking girl and guy live this. Listen, they're just as ignorant as you are, right? It's part of being young. I know some of you are like, you just called us ignorant? Well, if the boot fits, right? I mean, part of it's age. And maybe you're not ignorant. But you know what wisdom is at your age or mine? Wisdom is when you look around and everybody's just dancing to the beat of whatever the most popular drum is playing. You know what wisdom says? Wisdom looks from the outside and says, I don't really know that they know what they're doing. They're just doing what everybody else is doing, and that doesn't make it wise. You can be 12, you can be 50. I'm not 50. You can be 12, you can be 50, and still not get that right? Wavering. So for you and me, if Jesus is the risen Savior who revealed God's love, if that's who Jesus is, follow his way. But if the values of your world, if the wavering and the dancing of your world that says you get all you can, you accumulate, you gotta be hard right here, you gotta be tough, don't let them see you sweat. If that's the wise way, then go ahead, live that way. But you gotta choose. Wavering, skipping back and forth will exhaust your soul at any age. The Israelites were attracted by the exotic ways that the nations around them worshiped all the different gods, and they were influenced, and they were enticed to turn from the one true God and Creator to all these exotic ways. We're pretty influenced easily. Well, I won't even talk about you all. Let me talk about me. I remember when cell phones first started being used by like business folks, right? It had to be like 1997. I was in an airport. This guy had a flip phone, and he was just talking loud on his cell phone, right? Like talking about how much money they're going to make and trade this or do that or whatever. And I looked at the person that I was with, and I'm like, man, how important do you think you have to be to carry a phone in your pocket? And here are the words. I will never have a mobile phone, because that's probably what we called it back then. I will never have a mobile phone. Yep, I do. Or when I got a mobile phone, and then like the touch screens first started coming out, the first iPhones, right? I remember being like, that's crazy. You don't even know where you're touching. There's nothing to touch. It's just all screen. I got to have a keypad, right? I got to have numbers or whatever. I'll never have a touch phone. Now I got, the big fat plus whatever, right? Like, or skinny jeans. When they first came out, like when guys walk around skinny jeans, I swear they had to walk like this, right? And I'm like, I am never going to wear skinny jeans until they came out with that stretch skinny jean action, baby, what? Yeah. Well, I've obviously been influenced, right? By technology, by trend, by fashion, right? And all of us, we get influenced. The more you see something, the more cool it becomes, the more useful you see it could be. But what about values on how you live your life, on how you believe, on how you will treat other people? You think you can be influenced in that way? Oh, come on, absolutely. We are influenced in that way. That's why a choice is demanded. You and I have to choose just like the Israelites had to choose. When the odds are against you, when everybody bows to the trends, you've got to ask yourself, who will I trust? Who will I follow? But here's the deal. This is a safe place, and I hope you know that. But it's one thing when everybody in the rooms, because you can get influenced by the good too, right? But when you go back to your schools, when you go back to the areas where Baal and his trends are worshiped, and people waver because that's what everybody does, it's a lot harder when the odds are against you to make a stand. I want to tell you what Elijah did. 1 Kings chapter 18, check this out. Then Elijah said to the people, I am the only one of God's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one of the bulls and cut the bull in half into pieces. Put it on the wood altar, but do not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull. I'll put it on the altar. I'll cut it into pieces, but I will not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire, by setting the sacrifice on fire. That God is God. Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are so many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. So they took the bull given to them and they prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response, no one answered, and they danced. Same word when Elijah said, how long will you waver between 2 thoughts? They began to get drunk, do their dance around the altar. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. Now, come on. One of God's prophets talking smack to a bunch of pagan prophets. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it's kind of awesome. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. Shout louder. He said, surely he's a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought. Perhaps he's relieving himself. That's a nice translation for he's out, number 2, all right? Maybe he's traveling. Maybe he's sleeping. You got to wake him up. So the prophets began to shout louder. They began to slash themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for evening came. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. This may seem brave of Elijah, right? One guy 400 against 450. May seem brave. But let me remind you of a quote that Adria gave us last week when she was talking about David versus Goliath. She said, a champion isn't made in the ring. They're only recognized there. And here's what that means. Somebody who wins the fight, who wins the battle. What we recognize, what's revealed is what they were doing behind the scenes. The training, the preparing. And Elijah had already been living his life according to the courageous things of God. Matter of fact, the chapter before this one, during part of the 3 years of famine, of no rain, you know where Elijah was? While Ahab and Jezebel are trying to figure out the economy, trying to kill off God's prophets, you know what Elijah's doing? He's with a widow and her eventually dead son, who he brings back to life. While the pagan kings are doing their trendy things, the man of God is with widows and dead sons. Bravery doesn't come from who we wish we were, but it works itself out in every small choice that we make. Every bit of the behind the scenes training, because a heart that wavers back and forth will likely skip a beat in the moment when courage is needed. I mean, I don't care how tough you look. I don't care how big you are, how smart or beautiful you are. Yeah, I mean, like, champions aren't just born. They don't just happen. Like, all of a sudden, crisis hits and courage is needed. Even though I've been a coward most of my life and I just waver with the crowd, I think today I'm going to be brave. That's not how it works. No, actually, crisis reveals courage. It doesn't create it. It reveals it. You show me a kid at your school who stands up for the one being bullied, the one being made fun of. I'll show you a kid who's been making small character, courageous choices behind the scenes that you've probably not seen if you're not close to him or her. Courage drives us to do the good, the right thing we know we need to do, even when we're afraid and even when we don't know how things are going to turn out. Let me tell you about my first bully. I was in 7th grade. He was in 8th grade. His name was Dennis, and he was huge. Like 6 foot tall in the 8th grade. By the way, I haven't grown an inch since 7th grade. Thank you, God. I'm not upset about that at all, right? And he would punch me in the chest with like his middle, like half of his middle finger sticking out. And he'd punch me in the chest hard, and it hurt. But what was I going to do? The guy had biceps in the 8th grade that are the size of my legs, which I know aren't big, but still, like for arms, that's pretty big. And so I knew he would just like pop my face like a grape, right? And so I didn't fight back, and even though on the inside everything in me is like, oh, I hate it. So I'm telling my dad about this, and my dad gives me some real life old man advice. He's like, Dust, you really got 2 options. You can fight back and decide you're not going to get picked on every day, and you're going to get beat up. Small town, he knew who Dennis was. He said, or you can just take it, right? Then he told me the story of Gandhi. Gandhi, the revolutionary leader in India who was influenced, like all great leaders, by Jesus and nonviolent protest. In Gandhi's day, an Indian person in their own country, in India, couldn't walk on a sidewalk if an English person, especially an English soldier, was walking on the sidewalk. The Indian person had to get off and let the English person walk past. Gandhi, one day, as he's walking with his best friend, who happened to be a Methodist Christian missionary, they're walking. He decides he will not move. He won't fight, so he stands with his head bowed and will not move. The English soldier asks him to move. He won't move. So the British soldier takes the butt of his rifle and smashes it into Gandhi's face. Gandhi falls down. He bleeds. The missionary helps him up. Gandhi gets back on the sidewalk, bends low, and doesn't move. Now, it would be years before Gandhi and his people win the day through nonviolent protest, but biographers say that's the moment that he won his nation back. Because what are you going to do if you're that British soldier? You're just going to beat the guy up over and over and over, even when he doesn't fight back? He's unarmed? The British soldiers make fun of him, say some things, but you know what they eventually do? They walk around him. Dad tells me this story. So I go to school the next day and I just decide I'm going to get beat up. I don't want to be afraid. I don't like it, right? And so when Dennis punched me in the chest, I'm super nervous, but I put my fists up. And he laughs and says, Frazell, what are you doing? I said, Dennis, I'm not going to let you hit me anymore. You're going to have to beat me up. And you're going to have to beat me up every day, right? He looks at me as hard as he could, just hits me right in the chest. Like, fall down. I get up. Pushes me out of the way, walks away. Doesn't bully me anymore. Now, it doesn't always work like that. As a matter of fact, I had to do things like that several times, and a lot of times I crawled away bloody, right? But I also went to sleep at night not afraid. And that's just fighting. Right? That's just physical stuff. I'm really talking about character. I'm talking about when the crowd is doing this. I'm telling you, to stand out from that and say, no, I'm going to walk the wise path, the ancient way, man, that hurts a lot more than a punch in the chest. That's hard. It's difficult. But crisis doesn't change your heart and character. When those hard moments come where you have to choose Jesus or anything else, crisis doesn't change your heart, it reveals it. So what are you doing in the background? What kind of small choices of character and courage are you making now? Here's what Elijah does, right? They do their thing for hours, no fire, right? They're cutting themselves. Elijah, he creatively builds his altar to represent the 12 tribes of Israel, to remind the people of where they come from. And then he digs a ditch around the altar and fills it with 3 gallons of water. Why? Because he pours the water all over the wooden altar. Because I don't know if you know anything about water and wood and fire. It's hard to light wood when it's on fire. Because he believes God's going to do this, but he wants everybody to know there's no tricks here. If this works, it's because of God. And here's what happens, 1 Kings 18. Oh Lord, Elijah prays, oh Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. Prove that I have done all of this at your command. Oh Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, oh Lord, that you are God, that you have brought them back to yourself. Immediately, woo! Something happens when you pray. And I don't believe that it changes God. I think it changes you. And it sometimes opens your eyes to what God is doing and what God is getting ready to do. He prays, and immediately the fire of the Lord flashes down from heaven and burned up the young bull, the wood, the stones, the dust. It even licked up all the water in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell down. They wavered over here. And they said, the Lord, he is God. Yes, the Lord is God. You can read how that story ends. The people's passion for God doesn't last long because shock and awe don't change our hearts. But love does. And Jesus came with no tricks up his sleeve, no spectacles, just a bloody cross and an empty tomb full of evidence that the way of love, the way of sacrifice, the way of character, the way of courage, it may be painful. You may not see the light right away, but it wins the day in the end. This is what Jesus came to reveal, and we are left with a choice: Jesus or anything else. And here's the deal. To believe that Jesus is the way, that does not take bravery. I'm going to say it again. To believe that Jesus is the wise, good way, that does not take bravery. But all those small choices of courage and character and sacrifice and faith, when everybody else is wavering over here, that takes courage, and that'll change your life. And you're not alone. 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 18, Elijah thought he was the only faithful one to God in all of Israel. And God tells him, no. There are 7,000 who have not bowed a knee to Baal. You are not alone, and neither are you. You can't control the chaos around you and all the wavering and all the ways and trends that people will gravitate toward. But you can connect with other people who are going through it too and not choosing to bow a knee, but trying to live in the kindness and courage of knowing God. It's hard to live God's way when everybody bows to the trends, but remember, you're not alone. But I also want to encourage you with this, to ask this question: how has God worked in my life already? How have I seen God work in the lives of my parents? How have I seen God work in the lives of my friends, in the lives of my mentors, in the lives of my D group leaders? How have I seen God do? And then when you begin to think about that, when it gets hard, when all the wavering and everybody's over here, and you feel like you're all alone, you remind yourself, I'm not alone. There's lots of people my age that have not bowed a knee to all the ways of the world. But you also ask God here, you remember how God's worked in the past, and you ask God, would you do it again in my life? Would you do it again now? There are times when I look back at my 20s and I'm almost envious. I'm almost like, oh, God, do that again. I was a newer Christian and I was just allowing God to work in powerful ways. But here's the deal. I'm in my 40s. I can't go back, right? But I can allow God to do something new in my life now, in my 40s, in a whole new way. When I feel over here, isolated, alone, uncertain, well, first I remind myself I'm not alone. But then I ask God, would you do it again, but would you do it in a new way? Because listen, Ahab is not king anymore. Elijah, his prophecies are gone and it's over. He was swept up by a chariot of fire. But you and I, we're here now. We're here today. And God still plants seeds of hope and courage in the hearts of those who are willing to be brave, even when we're uncertain about how things are going to work out, even when we're afraid that we'll be left out. God does it again in a whole new way. And people are influenced easily, aren't they? I'm going to ask the praise team, come on up. People are influenced easily, right? So are you, so am I. So why not allow people to be influenced by our faith? Because here's the thing, and you know this. when everybody's wavering and doing this because that's what everybody's doing, the person who stands over here, not with judgment, not with meanness, you don't have to taunt. That's not the way of Jesus. It might be the way of Elijah. It's not the way of Jesus. When you live here and you are trying to live in confidence and courage, even though you're uncertain about how everything's going to work out, but you're following in the footsteps of Jesus, listen, even over here, I tell Asher this all the time, they may not say anything, but people are watching, and it's attractive. Because leadership that matters, courage in the midst of crisis, it's attractive. It doesn't mean you know everything. It doesn't mean you're certain of everything, except for the one who died and rose again. You're certain in him and his love for you, and therefore you can be over here. And you know you're not alone. Just look around, you're not alone. And then that you would pray, God, would you do it again? I know you've done it for ages. I know you did it, and people like Adrian, people like Dusty, and people like my parents, and people like Pastor Dudley. God, would you do it again, though? But would you do it in a new way in my life, at my school, in my generation? God, would you do it again? Lord, I pray that you would give vision to those whose hearts have skipped a beat today with a desire for courage, to stand in kindness and love and sacrifice and in truth, even when their whole world is wavering the other way. God, would you give them vision for what that looks like? In the midst of their timidity or fear, God, I pray for whatever that next small, good step of faith and courage or kindness would be. And then that step, God, they'd be able to look back to see what you have done already, and they'd be able to take the next step that may be harder and more difficult. It may risk more. But the whole time, God, may their prayer, may my prayer, may our prayer be, God, do it again and do it in a new way. You've been faithful again and again and again, so do it once more in my life in a whole new way, God. I pray all of this, Jesus, in your name, amen.